you're about to listen to is what we like to call a legacy episode. In 2016 and 2017, I embarked on a very special project, the Holistic Fertility and Wellness Podcast. I had the pleasure of interviewing experts and friends from around the world, as well as recording some of my own thoughts in solo episodes. These re-released legacy episodes are just a few of my favorite from that time. Although some of my thoughts and ideas have changed since that time, I think much of what you'll hear is still quite valuable. New episodes of Motherhood in America will be available soon, so keep an eye out. But for now, enjoy this special legacy episode. This podcast is for informational purposes only and not meant to provide medical or mental health advice and does not replace personalized care by your provider. Justine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's really my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. When I found you online, I want to say, well, it must have been last October because it was Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month is October, and then my birthday, October 15th, happens to be the day, Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. So I found you, I want to say on my birthday last year, because of the work that you do, and so I've been really looking forward to having some time to chat with you.
Thank you. That as a small author, that makes me excited that you found me through that. That means like something stuff that I'm doing is actually working.
Yeah. Yeah, you're being noticed. So,
thank goodness. So work is hard.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I hear you. So, Justine, I would really like us to spend some time today talking about your story and just, I guess, sort of dissecting it a little bit to really get to the nitty-gritty of what has been so unique and interesting about your story and how it's brought you to where you are today. So if you wouldn't mind just starting by sharing your story, and then we can kind of circle back to talk about some of the specifics.
Sure. So I actually, I grew up most of my life saying I didn't want to be a mom. Now I'm a therapist, so I now know that was a huge defense mechanism to kind of protect me from potential grief and loss, which we all know there's no way you're going to protect yourself from grief and loss in this life. But in high school, I had 2 back surgeries, and I was misdiagnosed for a year of my life between the ages of misdiagnosed for a year and a half between the ages of 11 to 13. And my pain was in my lower back. So I had hundreds of x-rays and MRIs and CAT scans all on my lower back, all unshielded. And when I was finally diagnosed, they found a broken back, and the injury was so old that surgery was the only option. So I had my first surgery my freshman year of high school, and I was in a body cast for 6 months.
Oh my goodness.
And then, so the body cast is usually what gets people.
Yeah.
And then I just happened to be the unlucky 10%, and they had to repeat the surgery my senior year of high school, and I was in a body cast again for another 6 months. And so I kind of knew that being a mom probably wasn't going to be a possibility. I definitely knew that the thought of pregnancy was not something I was looking forward to at all. Didn't even think that my body could do it. And so, my husband Chad and I got married really kind of thinking that we were not going to have children at all. And then, whether or not you want to call it the biological clock or just timing or whatever else, then you kind of I do want kids, absolutely. And I did some of my own therapeutic work. And so at that point, surrogacy had kind of started to get a little bit more of media coverage in that. So we pursued that basically. We put in, because I never could find a doctor that would say, yep, you can carry a pregnancy and we think you'll be fine. They would always usually kind of say you can try. We would never recommend that you have a second pregnancy because of where my injury is. And it's kind of well, I can't be pregnant, and on month 5 you put me on bed rest, and we learn I have to have a 3rd surgery. And so for me, it was just kind of one of those things. I can't imagine trying to do the hardest job on earth, being a mother, with chronic back pain or having to have a 3rd surgery. And so that's when we started looking into gestational surrogacy.
Okay.
And it, I knew nothing about it, obviously. And so I just took to the, awesome world of the internet, and I just placed an ad on a surrogacy website, just kind of saying like, this is my first message. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just looking for information. And automatically I was just inundated with messages. Some of them, like sometimes 10 a day at first. Some women literally offering me their uteruses, and some women just saying like, I just did a journey, so I'm not ready to do another one, but this is what I recommend. And so it was just like this, it was my first like toe in the water of this incredible community that we have, like this tribe of infertility and loss that God, none of us want to be a part of, but once we are in it, we are so grateful for it.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we met our surrogate, Michelle. She lives in Indianapolis and we're in St. Louis. She had always wanted to be a surrogate her entire life. She had an unplanned pregnancy at 19. They got married. They had they had their daughter about 6 years later. They were done with their family, and she'd always wanted to be a surrogate. So we met, and it worked, and it clicked. We did the whole contract thing, which is just awful, and we set forth in doing IVF, which we were going to do one round because that's all we could afford, especially financially. And I never had really good numbers. You'll never hear a doctor say that I have damage from my back surgeries, or especially from being misdiagnosed, but I have no doubt that that's definitely plays into it. I mean, I was 34 at the time. We had an excellent doctor. We should have had good numbers, and we only got 2 embryos that first round. They looked good, and we transferred them and, did the dreaded 2-week wait. And she wasn't pregnant. So the beta was negative, and it didn't take. And it was, we were so sure. I mean, we had our 2-week wait over Christmas. We had shown, those 2 babies, the embryos, to all of our family. She was saying like, I think this is working. I know it is. And, you go into it because you have to hope, even though the statistics, and the statistics are terrible. The statistics in IVF are not in our favor at all.
Right.
And yet we have to go through it with some version of hope. And that's definitely one of my messages with Ever Upward, is we have to have a healthy version of hope, because I don't think it can be this blind hope. I don't think that's helpful, and I think it's unhealthy for a lot of us in the journey, especially. But so we get that phone call that nothing is in her system. Neither embryo even tried to attach at that point. And so we were devastated. It was just not what we expected to hear at all. And while you're actively grieving 2 babies, there's also that thought in your head that, like, whether or not it's purposeful, definitely think there's probably some infertility doctors that it's purposeful, but like, that your eggs are dying by the minute and you are running out of time. Yeah. And you got to make a decision. And so, we couldn't. I mean, it was $13,000 to $15,000 a round. Like, we didn't have that. And so one of my friends, who's also a therapist, she has had a couple pregnancy losses, and she said, here's the deal, Justine. You guys are actively grieving 2 babies, and you have to make a decision. Are you going to be okay in 20 years' time looking at one another, knowing that you tried this one time and it has less than a 50% chance of working? And that's when we took the loan out the next day. And fortunately, we had the ability to take the loan out the next day. There's a lot of families that don't even have that option to take out a loan for another round of IVF. So we embarked on one more round. The second round was horrendous. Both Michelle, my surrogate, and I had all the side effects that second round. So I always tell all my clients, like, every round is different. You cannot expect it to be the same, because it's synthetic hormones that we're shooting into our body. It's not awesome stuff.
Yeah.
So you're gonna respond in different ways. And so that second round, I technically had worse numbers. We only got 1 embryo transferred, and it also did not take. And that was what I now call, after doing the work that I've done the last, so that we ended our journey 5 years ago. So the last 3 years, I've done a lot of advocacy work and writing and speaking. And that was what I call our enoughs and everythings. Like, how far are you willing to go? How many rounds? How many years? How many losses? How much money? What is your enough? What is everything that you are willing to do this? And you have to have that open dialogue. And yes, that decision can change in different parts of the journey, but we must, I believe, have a limit. I don't think that this infertility journey, it cannot end only when you have a healthy baby in your hands, because I think for some of us, unfortunately, that will not be our ending.
Right.
And I know that that's really scary and heartbreaking for people to hear, but the pursuit of motherhood, of doing round after round after round and tens of thousands of dollars, is destroying us. And so we knew after that second round, that was our enough and everything. We knew we had to stop. We, all along the journey, knew that adoption was not for us, which is also really scary to say out loud, because most people just think that the fix for infertility is to adopt, and that adoption is also super easy, and it's not. The work that I have done since then, I know adoption, I don't think is a huge black and white decision. Like, I have no idea what the future holds for me. I don't know if, we are guardians to several children in our lives. So we may raise a child yet, but what I do know is that we are not willingly signing up for $20,000 to $40,000 more and years more and losses more in the adoption journey. And that is for us. But for a lot of families, moving on to adoption is right for them. And so when we knew that we were finished, we have really worked hard. I have really worked hard at changing my entire life, because that was the depths of the deepest, darkest hole I've ever known. So I had to dig my way out. And we live what I call a child-full life, which means I really do the work on myself in creating and asking for and also receiving other ways to mother, because mothering is a huge value of mine. And so I must do the work in order to receive those opportunities and also to create them. Right.
Wow, that's beautiful. There are so many things in your story that I'm sure some of the way that you've been able to manage this is due to the fact that you are a therapist. And so you have these extra resources that a lot of people don't have. It's something that I can relate to. I've talked about a lot on the podcast as being a therapist. I think that, obviously it doesn't make it easier, but you understand the resources that you have to be able to work through stuff. So there are just so many really interesting pieces that I hear from you. I'd like to just go back and touch on some, like talking about having a healthy version of hope. Can you tell us a bit more about what that means?
Yeah, I did a blog series. It must have been last year sometime. I have a visceral reaction when one of the messages that we get in the infertility community is to never give up. Yeah. I get so frustrated by that, especially when it's delivered by people who mean well, but it's typically by people who, one, have had the traditional success story of the baby, or the person who has endless resources to keep trying for the baby.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't think that message is helpful. And so I talk about in my work, like, we must have a healthy definition of hope. Like, there are some things of our journey that are just not going to be changeable, that we must work on accepting what cannot be changed, and that I must actively accept. So it's not this, oh, it is what it is in this passive sense. It is this, it is what it is, and this is what is in my control, and this is what I'm going to change. One of my their story is a little bit more of their story is going to be in my next book, but my oldest friend, they actually have a chromosome mutation, the husband does, so he wasn't producing sperm, and so after a failed round of IVF, they adopted embryos. And so, like, for them, for example, IVF in the traditional sense never would have worked. They could have done 10 rounds. They never, ever would have gotten a healthy baby. And so, like, there must be this healthier version of hope. And for some of us, doing this work of letting go of a dream that's destroying us or ending up costing us more than it will ever fill back up is a really hard day, but it is one that you really can start to redefine and move forward.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of that plays into this idea that you have of, what is your enough and your everything, and that is going to be different for every person. And I think that people have an idea in mind of what that would look like, but it's so different when you're actually in it to be able to say when enough is enough.
Right.
And
well, and I think too, like, especially in this journey, because we're always kind of going to that, like we're always in these timelines, these waits, like I got to start birth control, or then I'm in the 2-week wait, or what if this doesn't work? And the doctors are also kind of, get us there. Like, if this doesn't work, this is our next step. And so one of the things I've been working with my clients, kind of this mantra that I've taught them, like, I don't have enough information right now to make this decision. I think that's an important mantra to have in this journey. Like, we need to have this discussion of our enoughs and everythings that, because maybe we're not willing to go on to IVF. Maybe we're not, and have that discussion. There is also this piece of, like, one, we're allowed to change our minds, but then two, sometimes we don't really have enough information to make that decision until the door is really, really closed. Yeah. We only had enough for one round, and then you lose 2 babies and you feel like your soul's being sucked out from underneath you, and it's awful. And like, you redefine your enough and everything right then and there, because I didn't have that information, you know? And so, like, I think that that's really helpful for people in this journey is I don't have enough information right now to make this decision. And as uncomfortable as that is, because that means uncertainty, we must be willing to sit with it.
Yeah. So how did you know when it was enough for you?
It's interesting. I had a speaking engagement a year ago, and they were giving away a free round of IVF. And the organizer looked at me and she goes, "Well, would you do it again?" And I looked at her, and at first I just my automatic response was like, "Well, when the money's gone, the money's gone." Like, for us, and this is going to be different for every family, because there are some families that are okay going into debt by $50,000. For us, I was not willing to go into debt that much to then raise a child that also is going to cost me about $400,000 to raise. Right. That was for us. That was one of our decisions. And so, like, my automatic response to her was like, "Well, when the money's gone, the money's gone." And then she asked me, and of course this was right before I was going on stage to speak. She goes, "Well, what if you won the free round?" And at first I was kind of like, "What are you?" And then I was like, "Nope, this is," and I looked at her and I go, "You need to stay for my talk." And I go, "When you're done, it's okay to be done." Yeah. Like, it doesn't mean that I like the result of it. And it doesn't mean that my grief is not there every dang day. But it is okay for me to say, like, I'm jumping off this train. I'm done. I'm on a different train because grief lasts a lifetime. But, like, I'm done with the hormones. I'm done with the weights. I'm done with the money. I'm done living my life on hold like this. And I think every couple, every family has to give themselves permission to find that place. Right. Oh, I completely agree. And a lot of this, I think, too, speaks to even what I try to encourage listeners in a lot is to know when to take breaks. Even, for some people, it's not that they're to a point where they're ready to say enough is enough, but that enough is enough for right now. Like, for now, we need to spend some time focusing on our marriage, on our life, on just any other number of things, because people can get so wrapped up in this, in trying to conceive, that all that other stuff stops being important. And so yeah, I think that we can use that same idea to know when to take breaks. Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. So, gosh, there's so much, Justine. There's so much that I want to ask you. I have all these notes now. One thing I also wanted to kind of chat with you about is, I love your message about adoption as well, that it's not the fix. And one of the things that I've talked with people about before is being cautious of that. For so many reasons. I mean, one of them being the fact that no child wants to know that they were
second choice, or like that they were the backup plan. And so I don't think that most of the time that adoption should be the backup plan if fertility stuff doesn't work out the way you want it to. But in addition to that, it is so not an easy process. And my husband and I had failed adoption in our story. And so I can speak from personal experience that it wasn't what we expected it to be. It wasn't what so many people have ideas about, that's going to be the thing. Oh, you've got this guarantee of a child at the end, and you don't.
Right.
And there really is no way that we can guarantee that perfect ending that we're looking for. And I think that's what a lot of your message is. As hard as that is to accept, that is also so freeing, I think, to know that we can't control these things that we're trying so hard to control.
Right. Well, and early on when I started Ever Upward, that was a big part of my message. Like, it's not just adopt, and that idea has really started to get some traction in our community for sure, because it goes hand in hand with this idea that I think a lot of people think the natural next step for failed infertility treatments is adoption. Adoption is not a fix for infertility. Mm-hmm. However, on that same, kind of within that same idea, even if your infertility treatments work and you get your 2.5 kids, or nowadays it seems like 3 kids, everyone has 3 kids.
Yes.
Even if you get those, it doesn't fix it. Mm-hmm. You still have this journey that it didn't happen how you hoped, dreamed, and planned. That is grief. That is loss. You didn't get to get drunk and get pregnant. You didn't get to just pull the goalie and say, oh, we're trying, no, you had to do it in a cup, or you had to go out and adopt. It didn't happen the way what we think the normal family comes about. And so within that is loss and grief that we have to, that now becomes part of your story. There is not a Band-Aid to that.
Yeah. Oh, you're so right. You're so right about that. I love that. That's never going to stop being a part of the story, even if you do end up with adopting 100 kids, that you're still going to have had this really challenging experience that came before. So what else have you learned about grief? And it sounds like a lot. I'm sure that we could fill up a whole podcast about that. But if you can give us kind of a summary of what has been most important for you in your story of what you've learned about grief.
I think I did a month ago, I did a Facebook video on grief, and it was for me, which, the woman who infertility treatments did not work for, it went viral because it was over 4,500 views, which for me
it was amazing.
Viral.
It was seriously amazing, Justine. I shared it with all my people.
Thank you. I told my husband, I was like, man, I knew everyone had grief, but holy cow. I think one of the biggest things is that infertility, especially, you're signing up for a life of grief. It just is what it is. It's grief of normalcy. It's grief of the idea. It's a loss of what should have been, could have been, what I deserved, all these things that we kind of kid ourselves into thinking. It's the yearning of normalcy, the yearning for our naive, to be naive of how to make a family or whatever. We lose that innocence. And so you're signing up for grief in this. But what I've learned throughout this journey is that, yes, mine started as an infertility story, but I'm learning that, everyone's got grief, whether or not it's the loss of a relationship, a loss of a person, a loss of an idea, whatever it might be, we've just about all got loss. And one of my biggest messages is, and it's one of my most popular pieces, HuffPost ran it a couple of years ago at this point, loss is loss. And so that's one of my biggest messages in the infertility community. We have got to stop comparing stories. Hard is just hard. Struggle is struggle. And I think loss is loss. And I actually came up with this concept when I was working with a client who is not in the infertility community. She had lost her 17-year-old daughter in a car accident. And she looked at me in session one day and she said, is it better that I got 17 years with my daughter, or better that you never even met yours? And I looked at her and I said, what if instead we just looked at each other like mothers who lost their children? Because both are just really hard. when we compare our losses, when we compare our grief, when we get into these pain Olympics, we're alone. That's disconnection. That doesn't foster connection. Instead, we can look at one another and say, like, me too. I get it. This is hard. This sucks. That's that empathy component that I'm trying so hard to bring into the infertility world too, because I don't need any more sympathy. I don't need any more of like, oh, you poor woman, you can't have kids. I don't need any more of that. That makes me feel even more alone, and I'm already alone. I'm like the only woman without kids almost everywhere I go. Instead, I just need someone to have empathy and say, that really sucks. You would have been a great mom.
Yeah.
But that requires them to get vulnerable. And that's all the work that I do with Brene Brown. But like, and that grief part too, like it's, you cannot fight it. You cannot rage against it. You eventually have to cope with it. Like that metaphor that I shared in that video of like, we ride the wave. Like, but trying to avoid it, trying to escape from it, raging against the people in our lives, being bitter, cutting everyone out, all of those ways that we offload the hurt, as Brene says, doesn't help us move through the grief. And then it defines all of our story. Then I'm only the sad, bitter woman who can't have kids.
And that sounds terrible.
And that's terrible.
Yeah.
I don't like, and that like, but that's what happens if we don't become the author of our lives, if we don't change that story.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I see this too in women who do still go on to have children. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is that, this is a message for everybody, really, that, again, it goes back to if things didn't work out how you hoped and planned. So there are still those women who couples who will go on to have children, but still hang on to so much of the sadness and bitterness and resentment even after having that fertility success. And so if, like you said, if we don't become the authors of our story, if we don't process through this grief, then we are going to just hang on to that. And it's yucky. It's not a place I want to stay. Right.
It defines everything about who we are. Like, we become what has happened to us versus rising through it. Or, like as I write in the book, like defining our own happy ending and rising ever upward. Like, that's when I do advocacy speaking and things like that, like that's why I want the healthier messages in the infertility community to get some more traction, because even if you get to be one of the ones that it works for, it's not fixed. This journey changes everything. And if you don't do the work, it will destroy almost everything good about you. I've seen it a lot. And so for me, that's one of the reasons I had to stop, because it was destroying everything good about me. That's the reason I had to dig my way out and start this work, the self-care work, the work with Brene, speaking my truth, owning all the parts of my story, all of that, because otherwise it defined everything. It wasn't just a part of my story.
Yeah, and I really love what you said too about us not comparing stories. I think that is so incredibly important. And I am thinking back to when my husband and I lost our first pregnancy to an ectopic pregnancy. And I told a coworker of mine, and she was much older than I was. She's like old enough to be my mother. And so she had a son who was my age. And she said, I'm so sorry, I can relate to that. And then tells me the story of when the fact that her son had been a twin, and that twin died when he was just a couple days old. And I was so incredibly honored that she would allow for my, I was pregnant for 8 weeks, that she would allow for that loss to be as important as her loss of an infant. And that honestly has shaped so much of how I've been able to view other people's stories in general, because like you said, everybody's story is different and everybody's loss is significant.
Right. Loss is loss. And when we step out of comparison, we get to be with one another in it. It's just, and feel seen and heard. And that's where healing can begin. Healing is not in disconnection. We are wired for connection.
Or in denial.
We are not going to do this.
In denying that it's hard and that it hurts. Right. So no healing comes from that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, if we can switch gears just a little bit and then talk about the bright side, of this, that I love this concept that you have of living a child-full life. And you did touch on that in your story, but I would love for you to expand on that, on what that means and what that looks like for you specifically.
Yeah, I just said this to one of my clients this week. Like, I think one of the saddest things that I see in the infertility community is that we cut everything kid out of our lives, which I get. We do need to self-preserve, and say no to some of those baby showers and birthday parties and things like that.
Right.
However, there is this other side that we are desperately trying to be a mom because we want to be a mom, and then we're cutting out the children that help us honor that value. And that, I think, is more harmful to us in the long run. And so, when we ended our journey, it was kind of okay, I know that motherhood is an important core value of mine. How am I going to incorporate this into my life? And so, we have the house we have a toy room for all of our friends who have kids. We have a pool, and we bought the house with the pool for two reasons. One, I didn't want to be forgotten about, for sure. I didn't want to be the only one without kids and the house that they can't come over to and play. But two, I wanted to be part of their lives. Yeah. And I wanted them to have this house, let's go over to Aunt Justine and Uncle Chad's house, because they have this fun house and they know us and see us. And so some of this childful life is really being actively involved in the children's lives, all of our friends' kids, and all of our friends have 3 boys. It's
oh my gosh.
We're all of our closest friends have same gendered children, and there's 3 of them. We have new church friends that they actually have 3 girls, and it's so weird. But so it's being active, and asking for those invitations, and letting my friends, and setting boundaries, no, I want to be invited to the baseball games and the church musicals, but I also need you to know that there will be times that I need to say no, or that I might even back out last minute because it's been one of those days and I can't be there. And so really telling our loved ones what we want and need and setting those boundaries is a huge part of living this childful life. But then, I've also found I reparent a lot of my clients. Working with my clients is a way that I mother. I volunteer a lot. I serve in the church nursery because I want to be around babies. And does it hurt? Yeah, it does. However, my motherhood is a huge part of who I am. And so if I cut that part out, I'm not honoring my story at all. And I sure as heck am not honoring my 3 babies. And so I find ways to do this work, to create and fight for and accept all of those ways to mother, because it's an important part of who I am. And it's one that I want to honor and not fight against because it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. Yeah. I can redefine that, and then, I do have, I have the world's weirdest hobby. You mentioned in my bio, I raise butterflies. It's the world's weirdest hobby, and yet every person loves it. My Facebook from July to October is very popular.
Oh, I'm sure. It's so
because
cool.
People love it. But it is. It's one of those ways that, I don't know. I sacrifice to take care of them. I release them and let them go. It is a great metaphor for just life in general, but it is a way that I mother. And so there is this part that just because my journey ended without kids does not mean that I don't have them.
Oh my goodness. I just love that so much. I really, really do. And again, it's the same, what am I trying to say? It's a concept that women in general who are, even if they haven't decided to stop trying, that they can have that experience in the waiting to be able to open yourself up to spend time with children, to find ways to mother. One of the conversations that I had with somebody I interviewed last summer about my own journey was that I realized through the process, I don't know how much you know about my story, but it was 9 years before I got pregnant. So 9 years is a pretty decent amount of time. And through that, I found things to mother and to what I'd say give birth to, like the podcast, for example, to my private practice, to I had a blog for a while where I was working on like refashioning thrift store clothes and stuff, and like those kinds of things to me were things that I was giving birth to and nurturing, and it's just so in us, and we can continue to do those things whether or not we have kids, and in any stage of life, it's so needed, I think.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And, I've said that I have a couple clients that have new nieces, and, to work with them and say, like, you need to self-preserve, of course, because this is really difficult. And at the same time, this is a new niece. You get to be her aunt. And that is an incredible opportunity.
Yeah.
You must change the meaning that you attach to it, because that's what it is. And I have control over the meaning that I attach to things. Mm-hmm. A new niece doesn't mean that there's one less baby for me to have. A new niece doesn't mean that we have to change the meaning that we attach to it.
Right. I completely agree. Absolutely. Well, Justine, this has been fantastic. I just so appreciate your genuineness and openness about your experience. Before we sign off, can you give our listeners a parting piece of wisdom to take with them?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that if you speak your truth, and that doesn't mean that you have to publish the book like I did, or write the public blog, or even come out on Facebook, but I do think if you do that and you tell your story, you will be very pleasantly surprised by the support that you do get, and how much you can heal within that support. But like, if you do this work, you speak your truth, you really take care of yourself, you can trust that this will be okay. No matter what you get, it will be okay. It might not look like what you wanted it to, but if you do this work, it can be okay.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Justine, where can we find you online?
So I'm pretty much everywhere because I'm a small time author. So I'm on Instagram, Justine Brooks Froelker on Instagram. I have a public page on Facebook. It's the long name, Justine Brooks Froelker, there also too. Online, the blog is everupward.org, and all my books are for sale there. I have a blog book coming out in April, actually, for National Infertility Awareness Week, and then I'm hoping to release the follow-up to Ever Upward in the fall. So those will be available on Amazon. So, but social media is definitely the best place to get a hold of me. I'm on Twitter too, Justine Froelker on Twitter, I believe. Sometimes the most supportive infertility community I feel like is on Instagram.
Yeah, I agree.
Feel like the 140 characters limits us a lot to talk about such a complicated topic.
Right.
And I find that like sometimes I'll get called into Twitter conversations of like, Justine, because they're like, some of my friends will be like, gonna tag you on Twitter, or you're like, therapy wisdom is needed. I'm like, oh Lord, that's why we don't talk about it in 140 characters.
Right. That feels impossible. That's why I spend basically no time on Twitter, because I can't manage that.
Yes, I know. I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to tweet 5 times for my responses because I refuse to be contained in 140 characters. Right.
Oh, I get it. Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. This has been, I think, a new idea probably for a lot of the listeners, and I hope that it really resonates with them. And I'm just certain it will. I'm certain people are going to be challenged and also truly blessed by what you've had to say today.
Thank you.
You are welcome.